This is CBC Vancouver News.
I should have nightmares of what I saw.
It brings back some feelings of PTSD, I can tell you.
1 year later, the province vows to help farmers scarred by BC's floods as wet weather returns.
We turn away between 15 to 20 people every night, so there's definitely not enough shelter space.
Struggling to stay warm in the capital, the challenges of homelessness in Victoria as temperatures drop.
We need to remember not to make the same mistakes. We need to learn from history.
And remembering Indigenous veterans who fought and died for Canada. Good evening, I'm Dan Burwood. Thanks for joining us. It's almost 1 year to the day since historic rainfall led to catastrophic flooding in Abbotsford's Sumas, Prairie. Grief and anxiety still weigh heavy on many people there. Now, as they mark that grim anniversary, provincial leaders are pledging more support and better preparedness in the future. John Hernandez has more on the painful memories and promises to help.
We've already had 2 of these atmospheric rivers in the last week and a half, and it brings back some feelings of PTSD, I can tell you.
Richard Bozema is still reeling. Just about a year ago, his cattle farm was underwater. Dozens of animals were evacuated.
Her mother was taken to another farm and she lay down and cabbed really with almost within an hour of being there.
Since catastrophic rainfall flooded much of Abbotsford's Sumas Prairie last November, hundreds of millions of dollars have been committed to flood recovery.
There's been close to 800 payments that have gone out to 370 farmers for things like shelter, fencing, animal feed.
Just days ahead of the flood's anniversary, provincial leaders are promising to stay the course as many farmers still struggle.
We know that we aren't at recovery yet. While some were able to rebound quickly, others needed more time.
Alongside assurances that the region is better equipped to respond to future emergencies.
There's just over 3.5 million sandbags, for example. There is 10 kilometers of tiger dams.
I was out here in a boat and it was still that high. I should have nightmares of what I saw and what I went through when I came out here in a boat. It was horrible.
But for John Yongema, whose home was then under 2 meters of water, the biggest concern lays on the other side of the border. Much of the water that flooded the Prairie came from the Nooksack River in Washington.
Farms work needs to be knocking on the federal door and making sure that they go to the states and get them to fix the problem on their end.
An effort the public safety minister says is happening.
The solution to the Nooksack is very complicated, and it is going to take both the federal government in Ottawa and the federal government of the United States.
A community on the mend, one that hopes its leaders will learn from a once-in-a-century disaster. John Hernandez, CBC News, Abbotsford.
If you were waiting for a new deal for health care funding in Canada, you'll have to wait a bit longer. After 2 days of talks here in Vancouver, health ministers from across the country and Ottawa could not hammer out an agreement on federal health care funding to the provinces. But as Lindsay Duncombe tells us, talks ended with both sides pointing fingers.
Just a few blocks away from the hotel where Canada's health ministers are meeting, a walk-in clinic. Christine Kelber has been here 3 times because of mysterious pain.
Usually you don't get to speak to the same doctor if you want to speak to someone right away, so you have to sometimes talk to someone who hasn't seen you before. You have to explain everything again.
The provincial health ministers are asking for billions more in annual health transfers to fix the system. After a first day of warm and fuzzy talk, familiar conflicts emerged. Quebec doesn't want any strings attached to new federal funding, and the Prime Minister questioned how provinces are spending their cash.
They don't have any more money to invest in health care, and therefore they need money from the federal government, while at the same time they turn around and give tax breaks to the wealthiest.
Then it got worse. At lunchtime, the premiers put out a statement saying there was no progress. Planned announcements on labor shortages and data sharing were scrapped.
And the federal government chose to withdraw participation from both the communique and from a joint press conference. I want to say that I find that disappointing.
All that premiers keep saying is that they want an unconditional increase in the Canada health transfer sent to their finance ministers. That is not a plan.
This all doesn't surprise those who watch these negotiations closely.
I think we should view this meeting as just one part of a broader process, and federal, provincial, territorial negotiations are never easy.
Bottom line, this is likely to be a hard winter for healthcare, with COVID-19, other infections, labor shortages, and a big injection of federal cash to help fix those problems doesn't look any closer now than it did before the ministers met. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Vancouver.
Developing news in the Fraser Valley tonight. Homicide investigators have been called in after Mounties say 2 people were found dead in Chilliwack. Police say officers were called to a home on South Sumas Road near Unsworth Road around 2 p.m. The victims were found inside. Mounties say their deaths appear suspicious and don't think there is a threat to the public. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team. With the blast of snow and wind overnight, there are questions about whether the city of Victoria has enough resources for people living outdoors. As Mira Baines shows us, concerns are growing along with the number of people living on that city's streets.
Struggling to stay warm as Victoria grapples with its first winter snowstorm, people living on the streets could be in for a challenging winter. Most of last night's snow has melted away, but temperatures are chilly. Grant McKenzie with Our Place Society says finding a shelter bed is not easy.
Our Place, we operate a night shelter year-round in the basement of our building at 919 Pandora, and we have about 30 people in there. It's full every night. We turn away between 15 to 20 people every night, so there's definitely not enough shelter space.
There are worries over staff shortages at shelters and whether enough resources are in place. BC Housing announced today that 50 extreme weather spaces are ready in the Victoria neighborhoods of James Bay and Rock Bay.
This just shines a spotlight on all the failures that's happened, all the failures in our system. I mean, what we're seeing on our streets is a big addiction crisis that's not being addressed, which is leading to homelessness.
Victoria Police say more people experiencing homelessness have been arriving in the area from other parts of Canada and are unfamiliar with the weather and resources available.
Anecdotally, and what we can say is there's been a few hundred people that are new faces to us all across Canada. So lots of folks in the Lower Mainland, but we've spoken with people who've come from the prairies and farther.
The city says there is a plan for extreme weather and coordinating overnight shelter spaces. The issue of resources and coordination are expected to be discussed at the City of Victoria's upcoming council meeting on Thursday. But for now, many on the city streets will hunker down in the cold. Mira Baines, CBC News, Victoria.
Testimony at former Surrey Mayor Doug McCallum's public mischief trial today shed light on the toxic dynamic that dominated Surrey politics in the months before the incident at the center of the case. As Michelle Gassoub reports, McCallum's team argues that while he may have been wrong about some details surrounding the day he claims his foot was run over, he was right in his accusations against his political opponent.
Former Surrey City Councillor Lori Guerra was the last witness to testify in Doug McCallum's public mischief trial. She testified that she and McCallum had previously been sworn at and yelled at by Debbie Johnstone, the same woman McCallum says ran over his foot. Guerra testified the Keep the RCMP in Surrey campaign that Johnstone was a part of became increasingly aggressive, showing up at council meetings and city events, and on one occasion to the front door of her home. In the afternoon, defender Richard Peck argued McCallum was facing, quote, unrelenting animosity and toxic fanaticism from the group. He says while McCallum's statements to police contained confusions and misperceptions, it was understandable that he was confused, given what he just experienced. Peck also honed in on one section of McCallum's original interview with RCMP, showing that while the former mayor urged police to access video of the incident, he also appeared confused about some of the details of what happened.
He pinned me right here, and then and touching me, and then just screamed blue murder, and then she turned this way, and that's where she ran over. Like, it looked like she purposely wanted to just clip me or something.
Peck argued McCallum fully cooperated with police, providing evidence like his shoes, his medical records, and pictures of his feet. Peck argued that given the political context preceding the incident, McCallum was correct in his accusations against his political opponent. The Crown expected to make its final submissions in this case tomorrow morning. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Surrey.
Indigenous veterans were honored at a ceremony in Vancouver this morning. Dozens of veterans, military families, and police marched down Pender Street and stopped to lay wreaths at Victory Square. It's the first time the event has been held in person since the start of the pandemic. Those who were there say the sacrifices of Indigenous veterans are unique. Have a listen.
We need to remember that freedom isn't free.
Being here today, just in respect to my own family's history of military service, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, peacetime as well.
Well, as an Aboriginal veteran, I served 11 years in the Royal Canadian Air Force, Canadian Forces. My father, Hector, World War II veteran, residential school survivor. He served in Italy, overseas with the Westminster Regiment.
I still feel reluctant coming out because we're still alienated by our own country.
He left for 30 years. If he had returned home at 78, I would have been, my brothers and sisters and I would have been sent to residential school. So those are the reasons why it's necessary to acknowledge the different role, the important role that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis veterans serve.
It took me 2 years to get my status back when I left the service, to get my status back as an Indigenous person. I had to give it up when I joined the service because I had to swear an oath to the Queen.
The leader of Canada's official opposition, Pierre Poilievre, spoke to members and guests of the Surrey Board of Trade today. He outlined his plans for the Conservative Party and for Canada's economy if the Tories win the next election and he becomes Prime Minister in 2025. Among his priorities, increasing affordable housing, fast-tracking immigration, and approving pipelines that the Trudeau government has cancelled.
The solution is we need to stop stopping and start starting in this country again. And that's the kind of Prime Minister I want to be. I want to unleash the full potential of our nation by getting the government out of the way and off your back and by your side.
This was Poilievre's first official address in BC since becoming opposition leader. Back to healthcare now. BC is in the midst of a crisis, as we know, as an estimated 1 million people don't have a family doctor to start. But there are plenty of other shortages too. Among them, concerns about cancer diagnoses being caught too late because of long wait times and critical staffing shortages. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Thanks for joining our commercial-free live stream. A sports showcase for people living with disabilities is set to take over the University of Manitoba this weekend. But as the CBC's Cameron McLean reports, organizers are worried about potential conflict when the Winnipeg Blue Bombers face off against the BC Lions later that day.
On November 13th, the University of Manitoba is hosting a massive sporting expo aimed at people living with disabilities. But organizers are worried about what happens 90 minutes after that event ends. Here at IG Field, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are playing in the CFL Western Final. And organizers of the sporting expo are worried that game day traffic could make it difficult to get attendees out safely.
It's for people with a disability, that's how it started, but really it's a bigger conversation about accessibility and inclusion. So
Kirby Cote is excited about the Accessible Sport Connection Expo. The visually impaired athlete is helping to organize the event, showcasing 28 sports adapted for people with disabilities. The event booked space at the university back in August, and November 13th was the only date that worked. Organizers knew there could be a conflict with the football game, but when they reached out to the team to try to coordinate parking and pickup after the event, Cote says she was disappointed with their response.
You know, the only option that they were open to was that we would just end our event even earlier than we already planned. And we had already planned to end our event early to accommodate the game and the parking fee.
Cote had hoped the team would designate a spot where Expo attendees could be safely picked up. So far, she says there's been no further help from the Bombers. CBC News reached out to the team for comment but did not immediately receive a response. The possible confusion over transportation has this wheelchair sports advocate worried some people might choose to just stay home.
Well, it seems disappointing to me because both of the Blue Bombers and the University of Manitoba talk about inclusion and access and diversity, but when push comes to shove, they're not doing that in action.
A spokesperson for the university said it isn't involved in parking arrangements for either the Sport Expo or the football game. Cote says she hopes people choose to come to the Expo and suggests people come early to avoid any issues with traffic. Cameron McLean, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A soccer match that actually never happened is raising questions, though, about the judgment of federal officials. Last May, Soccer Canada was supposed to host a friendly men's game with Iran here in Vancouver. That is, until relatives of those killed in a flight shot down by an Iranian missile complained. Prime Minister Trudeau also condemned the match, but as Ashley Burke tells us, behind the scenes, government staffers were continuing to discuss special travel exemptions.
As Canada was gearing up for a World Cup warm-up match against Iran, controversy was growing. Even the Prime Minister denounced Canada Soccer's plan.
It wasn't a very good idea to invite the Iranian soccer team here to Canada.
But CBC News has learned that days later, government departments continued discussions behind the scenes about facilitating the match. An earlier email shows Global Affairs had raised concerns if visas are not issued, Iran could launch an official complaint against Canada Soccer, and it could argue that Canada should not host the World Cup in 2026.
It's not acceptable for us.
Hamid Ismailian's wife and daughter were among Canadians killed almost 3 years ago when Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps shot down their flight. He was among the families writing letters demanding the match be called off over concerns Iranians with ties to the Revolutionary Guard could be part of the delegation.
We knew that IRGC is usually part of the team going to any country that the national teams in Iran go.
In fact, the government received 58 visa requests from Iranians, including officials who were not players on the team, a higher number than expected. Officials even discussed how Global Affairs might have to issue special travel exemption letters to Iran's delegation because of the tight deadline.
I think it's shocking. It's a shocking misuse of the national interest letter process. They're meant to be used very sparingly and only in the most important circumstances. An exhibition game against the Iranians certainly doesn't qualify.
But ultimately, those letters weren't issued or visas expedited before Canada Soccer called off the match under public pressure. The soccer organization now says that it was a mistake to schedule the game against Iran and so far has not faced any penalties for calling the match off. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
BC-born actor Ryan Reynolds has confirmed rumors he's trying to buy a hockey team. It's not the Canucks, calm down, the Ottawa Senators.
Very expensive
So, you know,
Yeah, it's not like it's
I need to partner with, you know, really deep pockets.
Indeed. Reynolds told Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show he would like to buy the team as part of a consortium. And it seems like Sens fans were watching. They gave Reynolds a standing ovation at tonight's game against the Canucks in Ottawa. The team announced last week that it was for sale. As for the game, the Canucks won 6-4. Still on a sporting nature, if you think your bicycle is too easy to ride, and who doesn't, you might want to try something different. How about this? Yeah, why not? These antique bike enthusiasts gathered in Prague to show off their penny farthings. The bikes, which pair large and small wheels, were popular in the Victorian era. These riders dressed in period pieces as they raced and showed off their skills, in particular, just staying balanced. The popularity of the rides might be long gone, but these daring riders are keeping old traditions rolling along, and they like the old-time bikes. There's a live shot of Olympic Park in Whistler. Clear, colder today, and that chill is set to get even deeper, especially with wind gusts. Johanna will have your BC wine forecast after this.
A couple of days ago, people in Washington state had their say in the debate over euthanasia. They voted against an initiative which would have made doctor-assisted suicides legal. Today, the Dutch government made a move of its own. It unveiled legislation that would allow a doctor to end the life of a terminally ill patient. But there would be very strict conditions, and euthanasia would technically still be a criminal offense. With all the concern about this controversial issue, we asked Ian Hannah-Mansing to find out what's being said and done in Canada.
Dr. Peter Jepson-Young has AIDS. It has robbed him of his sight. It has forced him to contemplate how he might die.
I decided that if things got to be too much, if I was in too much pain or too uncomfortable, that I would like to have an option to die when I chose.
For him, it is a personal debate. But in Canada these days, euthanasia is becoming a more public issue.
It's a phrase.
Last month, the Right to Die Society held its first meeting. Organizers say polls show overwhelming support for euthanasia, and those supporters are demanding action.
Those people in large numbers want a voice, which they have not had before. An opinion poll is not good enough anymore.
Okay, can you make a circle like that for me?
That sentiment dismays people like Will Johnson from the group Physicians for Life. He says what's needed is better treatment of the elderly, the sick, and more effective palliative care, not euthanasia.
Is this the best we've got to offer them a death that may be painless and may be quick, may be sanitized? I think that it leaves out of the equation all of the other things that we are failing dismally at.
There are calls to clarify the law on euthanasia. Although sections of the criminal code appear to make it illegal, many legal experts say they have never heard of anyone being charged. 2 cases at this hospital are an example of the uncertainty. A coroner investigated the deaths of 2 very ill patients and concluded each died of an overdose of morphine administered by a doctor. In one case, the coroner said the patient might not have been terminally ill and added, "This case illustrates one of the dangers of euthanasia." Police investigated, but the Crown decided not to lay charges, and officials will not say why. An MP from British Columbia has proposed a new law, a private member's bill, which would allow the terminally ill to refuse treatment and protect doctors from prosecution if they comply. But people on both sides of the issue say this bill probably won't end the debate. Some complain the wording is just too vague, while others point out private members' bills rarely become law. Ian Hannah-Mansing, CBC News, Vancouver.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. Join Gitsan journalist Angela Starrett as she uncovers land theft in Canada in the new CBC British Columbia original podcast, Land Back, out November 15th. And never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter at cbc.ca/Vancouver Inbox and keep connected with us.
Now back to healthcare again. BC, as we know, is in the midst of a health crisis, as an estimated 1 million people do not have a family doctor. But there are plenty of other shortages too. Among them, concerns about cancer diagnoses being caught too late because of long wait times and critical staffing shortages. Earlier tonight, our Anita Bath spoke with the BC Radiological Society's Dr. Charlotte Yong-Hing.
But if that mammogram is abnormal, the wait to find out whether or not it's actually totally normal and you can go back to your normal life, or whether you have cancer that may require extra appointments, extra imaging, surgery, that wait can be months long.
How vital are those months? Because if someone has cancer and it's progressing and you're having to wait that long, what could happen?
So we can extrapolate that if there's a longer wait for medical imaging, the cancer could progress if it's cancer, and the treatment required would be more aggressive. The cancer itself would be more aggressive, and the patient's quality of life would be more adversely affected by both by the cancer and the cancer treatment.
How has this gotten so bad in British Columbia?
It is due to a number of issues. Number one, there's a critical shortage of medical imaging technologists. Those are the people who create the images, the medical imaging images that are then read by radiologists. Without medical imaging technologists, there is no medical imaging.
The weather update is brought to you by Direct Buy Furnace, installing the most reliable heating and cooling brand. It's hard to stop a train.
Our BC-wide weather forecast now with meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff. Joe, saw the sun today, then appeared to be raining, but that was just the snow melting off the tree outside the building.
It's true. And then you checked the calendar and saw that it was the first half of November. Yeah, a rare early snowfall for much of Metro Vancouver. As you said, though, Dan, not a lot sticking around on the trees, but it is cold enough. If you've still got it on the ground tonight, good shot it'll be there in the next couple of days. But yes, this was the earliest we have seen snow at the airport since 1991, and there have only been 4 other occasions that we've had snow this early in the season. At the airport anyway, and the airport is farther south and closer to sea level, so harder to get that accumulating snow. All thanks to this Arctic air mass that collided with that system spinning off the coast of Washington yesterday. That system has sunk south, so we are left with the beautiful blue skies of that Arctic air mass. Now, the winds are still racing down through the inlets towards the coast, not quite as strong as yesterday, but Terrace is still under that wind warning for over 100 kilometer per hour winds. And Howe Sound, we're still seeing those northeasterly winds come down through the inlet. You're also under that wind warning. Much less gusty, though, across the strait. Still seeing gusts to 60 kilometers per hour, just not ferry canceling 80, as was the case yesterday. Keep your eye on the afternoon highs. This is tomorrow, and these are without the wind chill. Places like Williams Lake, it will feel like minus 20 tomorrow morning with those overnight lows. Again, these are afternoon highs, recovering a little bit as we head into Thursday and Friday. You get a couple of degrees more as we head into the weekend, but still much cooler than seasonal. So that Arctic air mass will retreat a little bit for Thursday, Friday, but still not at our seasonals, which for YVR for this time of the year is 10. We are well below all week long, watching for a potential for a few flurries Thursday afternoon into Saturday. System tries to get through, not showing up in the models yet, but sub-zero down for a couple more days of what's left of the snow falling from the trees in beautiful fashion.
And again, it's fall.
It's fall, yes. This is not a winter forecast. Do not adjust your whatever you're watching.
Sets, antennae, whatever. Thank you, Jill.
You're welcome.
That is your late news for Tuesday. Thank you for joining us tonight. For news at any hour, check our website, cbc.ca/BC. Your next local news is on the early edition on CBC Radio 1 that begins tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock. Have a good night.